Hello everyone, welcome to Pokemon Duel analysis again. I'm sorry that I couldn't upload another video for quite some while since I was busy with my work and real life. But here I'm back again with another top 100-ish deck analysis. So just like last month, I have did some analysis on the top 100 decks at the end of the cutoff. The statistic I took was 7 hours before the cutoff again. This time around, I tried to compare the number of figures in decks, compare it to the last month statistics, and I also did kind of a trend on how the figures popularity has been changing from the last month. As a lot of people probably already realize is that Dragon deck is really strong in the meta right now, and the top 100 deck actually reflect this quite well. As you can see here that I actually highlighted the dragon figures with the blue color here, and we can see that pretty much all the dragon figures are increasing in popularity. The only exception is Shiny Ray, which is really understandable because, as I said last month, that Shiny Ray's the main use for Shiny Ray is for against the UB deck, and since UB decks are on a decline, Shiny Ray really isn't really helpful in the Dragon deck. On the other hand, you can see that Rayquaza and Altaria are really soaring in number of uses, and as I predicted, I'm really happy that Tapu Koko actually has decreased in the popularity again, and it's no longer the most used figure in the meta, which is what I predicted last month. But to see it actually in action is actually pretty interesting, because we saw that the Koko Venusaur deck actually come to at least some popularity, but it didn't end up being the top 100 too much. And we can see one pretty big so I want to point out two things that happened during last month. One is the rise of the dragon decks, and we have already said that the dragon figures are really popular in the current meta, and its popularity has been increasing really There are two things that I mainly want to point out here. Is that one is that Tapu Koko is no longer the most used figure in the meta, as it saw a pretty big decrease in usage, which I actually predicted during last month's video. It's pretty understandable because Tapu Koko again is not synergizing very much with the current meta figures. There's only one deck that came to being, which is Tapu Koko and Mega Venusaur deck, which I think is a legit deck and it's probably a pretty fun deck to play as well. But in terms of power level, I think it's certainly has its game, but shouldn't be like a broken or anything. So we'll see how it develops. Another thing I want to point out is Hexerus. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly or not, but this guy who's just introduced with the latest update. He only had, I think, 3 or 4 days at the end of the month, and it's already have 13 copy in the meta, which is astonishing. I think its will is obviously pretty pushed, and it's one of the figure that's really strong against Zoroark. So that's probably the reason why the Dragon decks or even other decks are using some number of Hexerus. Because Dragon deck, the biggest weakness is against the Rush deck, so Hexerus does help against it. I'll actually do another video on deep analysis on Rush decks, hopefully coming soon. In that, I can go into details, but I can tell you that at the high level, Hexerus does help the matchup, but I don't think it's completely destroy the Rush deck. I'll go into details about it in a deep analysis of the Rush decks, but it's definitely a very strong figure, So last month, except for the dragons being on the rise, another thing happened, which is the mega rule change, which we didn't saw it coming, but I actually highlighted the figures that really benefited from the mega rule change, as well as some of the buffs from that change. I will leave the actual numbers to you to see it. You can pretty much see that like Blastoise, Charizard, Venusaur to a certain extent all gain popularity. The biggest winner is Lucario. Lucario, you can see that has a huge jump in number. It showed up in 55 decks out of the 100 decks, which is a huge number. And Lucario is really in a great place in the meta because it's great against Dragon. It's also a very good figure against Zoroark. With the updated ability, there's basically no figure that has a great matchup against it. I think probably the best matchup you can have is something like a very purple heavy figure that maybe can knock it out. But none of the figure can really be safe against Lucario. Only one figure I think is advantageous against Lucario, which is Turtonator, because it couldn't be knocked out with the knockout moves. We might see some increase in that, but because it's only 1 MP outside of the Dragon deck, it's a little bit harder for people to splash that. Going forward, I think because next month's banner is also Dragon, so I think the popularity for Dragon deck will remain or maybe even go higher, which means Lucario is still going to be one of the most popular figures. So since we're on the topic of countering the Dragon deck, I just want to point out 4 figures that I think are great against Dragon. Lucario, Zoroark, Mew, and Carbalion. So all of those 4 figures have a good matchup. At least can stall against Mega Ray, which is a key in fighting the Dragon decks. I would expect those figures to at least maintain the level of usage, and depending on what they introduce, they might have an increased number of usage going forward. Although the Hextras is targeted directly towards Zoroark, I still think Zoroark is a great figure to have in your deck, because Mega deck is also one of the decks that's being popular right now, so you need to have some kind of counter against the Mega decks. So Zoroark is pretty much one of the only figures that can really counter a lot of the high damaging meta that we're seeing right now. To dig a little bit deeper into the meta, I actually did some manual work this time. So because we now have information about the player, so I actually go through all 100 decks and recorded their total duels they play, wins they got, their current rating at the time I was recording this, and also their highest rating achieved. And I also manually selected the deck archetype, which means this time the deck archetype I think is pretty accurate, and I actually was able to identify more archetypes because even if there's only one ice deck, I will be able to recognize. So here the highlighted rows are player who tanked, which is really an unfortunate phenomenon. I have to admit it's one of the easier ways for you to get into top 100, but I think it's really unhealthy for the game, so I really discourage you to do that. Here I highlight them so that I will basically exclude them from my analysis. But anyways, so let's go back to the archetype analysis. So maybe some of you are kind of new to this. How do you secure a top 100 spot? Is it very hard? I would say it's normally there's 2 ways to do it. Either if you play not less than 100 games, the way for you to do it is that you need to win at least 2/3 of your matches. So if you go through the win percentages, most people will have more than 60% win percentage. If you were to have a lower win percentage, then you need to play tons of games. if you play a lower number, you'll need to have a higher win percentage in order for you to get into that. So here you can see the archetype content, and this I think is accurate archetype breakdown, probably most accurate ever, because I did this by manual work. You can see that the dragon is at the top with 26 decks, and Rush is at 15. So Rush deck compared to last month didn't actually die down. I thought that the water decks are great counter to them, and they are. And Dragon deck also gained a new tool for them to counter the Rush deck. Maybe it didn't kick in this month yet, but I think Rush deck will remain relevant for a little bit longer. And you can see that the Rush deck actually has a pretty high win percentage overall. And then going down the list, we see a water deck with a very high percentage as well, and the Mega deck. What I define a Mega deck is at least having 5 Mega Evolution figures, especially if the normal form themselves are not too strong, like Blastoise, Charizard. They are decent figure, but it's obvious that they're included in the figure because of the Mega Evolution mechanic change. Out of those decks, I actually divided their type into 3 types. One is just normal Mega decks, which just packing tons of Mega Evolutions. And then one type is having semi-land form in their Mega decks to extend their length of Mega Evolution. And then also this archetype of Venusaur Coco deck. So this isn't mutually exclusive. Some of the semi Mega deck or normal Mega deck will also be categorized as Venusaur Coco deck. And in total, there are 11 of them. So we can see that Venusaur Coco deck are slightly higher win percentage than the other Mega decks, but overall not too high. And there's a 9 Mighty Sphere deck, which might be under the radar right now. If you ask me, I actually didn't know about this deck too much before I look at the data, but they're actually doing very well. They're 9 deck into the top 100 and with the highest win percentage across all the popular decks. We see some fire deck, 2 UB deck, and a bunch of other stuff. Unfortunately, the second place for last month was the grass deck, which dropped a ton into only 1 deck get into the top 100, which is pretty sad. I thought grass deck were pretty well positioned. I personally don't play it, so I couldn't say for sure what killed them. Maybe it's because the overall increase in damage makes the Orientus damaging not as high as they need it to be. This is pretty representative of where the current meta is. And since we have all the extra information about the players, I did something more interesting. So what I did here for the first time ever is that I actually considered where the players' ranking are and then divided up most popular archetypes again. And I found something pretty interesting. As you can see, currently it's very hard for a person to be at over 4,000 rating. I cut off all the decks are below 3.4k. I don't mean to offend anyone who's below that rating. I just thought that by cutting off the lower ratings, it will allow us to get a more representative data of where the meta is. So here you can see that the dragon deck are pretty evenly distributed across different rating bands, and we can see that Rush is around the middle to high rating. The water deck is more or less towards the higher rating, and Mighty Sphere deck is at the top. I think at this meta right now, it's safe to say that the Mighty Sphere deck is the only deck that's trying to go up in number of figures, and it has this advantage they can gain by surrounding, which the Dragon deck doesn't. Dragon deck is just pure high damaging deck, which does have a sustainability from the Mega Ray, but I think the Mighty Sphere deck might be a good place to be right now. and we can see that Mega Deck are kind of in the lower ratings. My theory is that Mega Deck and Dragon Deck are really high damaging deck, which is really hard to handle for a little bit lower rating players. If you have the skill, you somewhat can prepare for the Mega Evolution and try to stall out the turns. I think higher ranking player might play around that a little bit better. That's why I think the Dragon deck or the Mega deck are at a little bit lower rating than the other decks. So overall, I think Dragon deck will probably remain to be very popular going forward, but you might want to leave an eye out for the Mighty Sphere deck. All this will probably change with the updates from tomorrow. We'll see what happens, and I'm excited for the new figures. So a little bit of a bonus is a discussion on, is it worth it to get the Hexorus deal? As I have already compared the different deals in the last video, the Hexorus deal will look like this. If you value Hexorus at 750 gems, 100 gem for each EX cube, a half a gem for each Carmonite, here are the value breakdown. So you see that the best deal out of the three Hexorus deal is actually the cheapest one. And it's actually pretty comparable to the enhancement booster set, which I kind of recommend you getting if you don't mind spend some money. And I personally think that Hexorus is a really strong figure, that if you don't have a huge stock of gem or booster ticket, it's worth getting this deal. And I can also see that you can value Hexorus a little bit higher, maybe at 1,000 gem. Then in this case, the value will also go up. And it's definitely not as good as the 80% gem sale, but it's still pretty decent. It's much better than the current beginning of the month deal. If you're interested in the figure and doesn't mind spend a lot of money, I would kind of encourage you to get it. I personally are still debating, but I think I might get it. All the spreadsheet I used today are linked in the description below, so that you guys can take a look at them yourselves. Thank you for joining me today, and hopefully you learned something. And please let me know what do you think about the meta and also the topic that you are interested in seeing. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.